Have you ever wanted to capture the scene view and immortalize it forever? Probably not. Well, unless you happen to be a tools connoisseur and be making a tool like the Scene View Bookmarks tool, and you want thumbnails to show where the user will jump to. Quick thank you to all those that picked up that tool from the asset store, and especially those that left a review to warn others of the benefits that may be afflicted upon them. Link in the description if you want to go grab it after the video. But let's dive into how we capture that scene view. Well, it's actually pretty simple, you see. The scene view has a camera, which you would have seen in a recent video I created on capturing the scene view orientation and jumping back to it. Again, link in the description. Now, if you've worked with render textures before, the process is pretty much the same thing. So I've already created the editor class and I've called it Scene View Snapshot. And in it, I've put a menu item. But you could create this as a scene view overlay if you so wish. There's plenty of videos on this channel on how to do that. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get the scene view. And we're going to use the scene view, last active scene view to do that. Now we're going to need to get the width and the height. And we'll get that from the scene view camera. And we could do the same with the height. There we are. Okay, so now we've got those, we'll want to create a texture 2D to store the information we're actually interested in, and we're going to call this capture. There'll be a new texture 2D, and we're going to give it a width and a height. There we go. Okay, so the next thing we're going to want to do is we're actually going to want to render the scene view camera, because this will actually give us the information into our render texture that we're going to be using. So we've rendered it out. Now we're going to want to get the active render texture and set that active render texture to the scene view camera target texture. So all this is doing is it's basically rendering out the camera and popping it into the active render texture. And that will enable us to read off of that and set the pixels in our new texture. Now we need to create a size for this reading of pixels, and that will be obvious. It's the width and the height, and we're going to be doing it at 0, 0. Now obviously you could resize this texture and do whatever you want, but in this case I'm keeping it simple and I'm just picking up everything that's in the scene view camera. Now if you just do the read, you won't get anything out. You need to do the apply afterwards to make sure those pixels stick to that texture 2D and they're ready to go. So the next thing we want to do is we're going to want to save it. We don't want to just leave it there. There's no point in that. And luckily for us, texture 2D has this great little function called encoded PNG, which will give us the bytes for the PNG that we're going to write out into our database. Now, where are we going to write that? Well, we're going to just put it in the root here, but you do you, stick it wherever you think is the best place to put it. And I'm just going to call mine scene view capture, nothing fancy. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the system.io to basically use the file class, which has this write all bytes, and you have to give it a location to put it. In this case, I'm interested in the data path, and I'm going to put in a separator, and then I'm going to give it the file name. And then obviously, we're going to want to set bytes. There we go. So all that's doing is it's basically writing to our database and our data path root, which is the assets folder, and it's writing the PNG we've got from our capture and putting in that place. Now, if you just used it as is, you wouldn't see the texture come up unless you actually accidentally done a refresh. So we don't want to do that. We want to force the asset database to refresh so we can see our new texture. And that's it. It's a very simple bit of code. So let's save and jump back into Unity, and we can capture our scene view. In this case, it's an amazing view of the Nature Manufacturer's mounted environment asset, which I'll leave a link for in the description. A simple press on our menu item, and hey presto, we've got a new texture generated in our project view. And if we want to look at that in the preview window, we can pop it up, but we can see it's sized at 1K, 1K. And that's just because of Unity's default settings. We can change that to see the actual size by changing this selection here. Now, if you're following along with these videos and you're building out the Scene View Bookmarks tool instead of picking it up from the asset store, you can use this functionality to create sub-assets on that Scene View Bookmarks directory. And then with those sub-assets, you can use open functionality as a point to jump to in your scenes. So if you're using that, there are some links in the description on how to perform those particular actions. Amazing, right? So go check out all the links in the description to the asset store and check out the video on screen now to take your development to the next level.